the major difference is that modern walking, people use a large stride, whereas in Nanba walking, because you kind of move from your center and you bring the back foot forward rather than taking a big stride, a big step out, it's more compact. I even came up with a proverb: long stride, no pride. Short stride is dignified.
That is Master Teacher of Nanba Walking, William Reed, and this is episode 18 of the Ikigai podcast. Find your Ikigai at ikigaitribe.com. This is episode 18 of the Ikigai podcast, and my guest today is someone who I like to think of as my senpai, or the senpai I wish I had living in Japan, William Reed. William is a Japan certified coach, a best-selling author, a long-term resident of Japan, almost 50 years, and has an 8th degree black belt in Aikido, a 10th dan in Shodo, which is brush calligraphy, a 7th dan in small brush calligraphy, and the list of Will's achievements in Japan go on and on, too many to mention in this introduction. But I should mention that Will holds a master teacher rank in Nanba Jutsu, which he defines as the art of physical finesse, and that is the topic of this podcast episode, Nanba Walking. Will, thank you for your time and for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you, Nick. Whenever I hear a list of those certifications, credentials, I always think of, oh my God, there's a lot of rings around the tree, Jurin, the age of the tree is increasing with all those years.
Well, what impresses me about you is you do come across as someone who's very happy and youthful, and you're very busy. Yeah, maybe there are lots of rings around the tree, but the tree looks pretty young to me.
Well, using the tree analogy, I think the strength of a tree, actually, we were talking about this in an online tea ceremony the other day, using the willow tree as the example, is that it's got deep roots and a firm trunk and very, very flexible branches. So it just lets the wind pass through and makes a wonderful sound. You've got to have a combination of rootedness and strength and softness, because the wind doesn't always blow in the way that you'd like it to. And if you resist it, it's going to snap the branches.
Well, I guess I could call you Will the Willow Tree as a nickname.
Don't call me Willow. I think that would be.
Anyway, moving on, Will, you are a Japanologist with over 4 decades of life experience in Japan, and you have an in-depth knowledge of the Japanese language and culture, and we certainly could have many conversations about your life in Japan and what you've done and why you love the country and the Japanese people. But I will ask you, what keeps you in Japan?
Well, great question, Nick. I first came here at the age of 20. I actually turned 20 a few weeks after arriving in 1972. And I know now because I teach students around that age, it's a time when you're not really an adult, but you're not a kid anymore. And you want to be seen as an adult. And so you tend to want to shut down the learning process. However, being thrown in head over heels into this environment where I didn't speak the language, didn't know the customs, and really didn't have a clue about what was going on, it was sink or swim and in full learning mode. And I must say, Nick, that has never stopped. And that's what keeps me here, because there's so many layers to the culture, and especially through the language. It's such a challenge, right? I'm still studying. And that is just, I think that's probably what keeps me here, the curiosity and the ongoing learning.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head for me as well. What I love about Japan is there's an endless amount of culture you can just dive into, and you could live 100 lifetimes and only scratch the surface of what you could learn, living in Japan or learn of Japan. So I think my recent connection to you it's relit this flame of interest and passion in aspects of Japanese culture I've neglected, things like kanji, and probably, learning more proverbs and parts of the language. So I
Mm.
thank you for that.
Well, words are, without learning. I mean, learning the language is such a slippery and steep slope. I mean, it just takes years and years. However, if you focus on the etymology of words and give it a good English explanation and look at the meaning of the kanji, you can go pretty deep without having to actually be able to speak uh, grammatically correct Japanese.
What's interesting you say that, because I did focus actually on learning to read and write when I lived in Japan the first few years. I seem to read better than speak better, which was usually the opposite of my foreign friends.
That's interesting. It is the opposite for most Westerners, but it's exactly the way Japanese learn English. They can read a lot better than they can speak. So you learned Japanese the Japanese way.
So, speaking of words, let's jump into this episode's theme, which is number.
Yeah.
And let's start with the meaning of the word. What does number mean?
Okay. Well, Namba is ordinarily written in katakana, which is the phonetic alphabet, and so there are no kanji. However, there is the kanji that are associated with is nan means muzakashi or difficult, and ba is place. So it means a difficult place or a trouble spot. Now, that, as is often true in Japanese proverbs, they don't give you the whole phrase. They don't give you the whole meaning. You have to kind of know it from the association or from your memory. So why would you want to study trouble spots, or get into trouble? I mean, we're in enough trouble as already, right? But the full definition, which is not really even part of the word, is that Namba is the art of physical finesse that enables you to get out of trouble spots, get through or out of trouble spots. You know the word yabai, which it means, it's like yabai means kind of, it's a tough situation. It's some kind of similar to namba in a way, and it's used a lot by young people to mean even the opposite. Oh, this is really delicious, yabai.
Yeah, that's
yabai.
right.
But in fact, the original meaning is ya is an arrow and ba is a place. So it's a place where arrows are being fired, and so it's a dangerous place. So yabai, nambai, similar meaning.
You reminded me of a Japanese friend who taught me the thing you should say after a first sip of beer when it's a hot day and it's really good beer. You say "kanari yabai."
Kanadi yabai.
It's funny how, the young take words and add new meaning to them. So, in the context of walking or movement, what is number?
Well, namba aruki is the Japanese word for namba walking. Okay. And it's probably the easiest way to explain it is in contrast to what we call modern walking. So the difference between gendai walking or modern walking and namba aruki. Okay. There are a number of characteristics that if you'd like, I can compare them side by side.
Sure.
But let me give you just a first helicopter view of it. It's basically it's moving like a cat in a really connected way with soft steps and small strides. So everything is sometimes it's described as a ninja walk or a samurai walk. Okay, so that's sort of the image of it. But to describe what it's like, for example, in modern walking, often you see power walking, people are pumping their arms. Same in running. They pump their arms a lot and they twist if you make a line of your shoulders and of your hips, those two lines would cross each other like in a twisting X because you're twisting your upper and lower body in opposite directions. But in Namba, the upper and lower body are connected, so there is no twisting. One of the principles of Namba is don't twist. Don't twist, don't force, don't disconnect. So it's the presence or absence of twisting, particularly in the upper body, that distinguishes modern walking from Namba walking. Another thing is that modern walking and modern sports, in fact, tend to emphasize muscular force, like kicking off the ground, pushing, putting your back into it. Whereas in Namba, we focus on the bones particularly the sacrum, the pelvis, and we focus on the movement of the bones. And the interesting thing about the body is that if the bones move, then the muscles are obliged to go along with it. You're not going to move them separately, right? You want to move your muscles, you can just move your bones, and they're automatically going to go. But it's more of an internal focus. Then, whereas modern walking is adapted to paved roads and maybe big, thick sports shoes and things like this. Nanba walking is really more adapted to uneven surfaces or natural surfaces. And that was really, it was developed in Japan, particularly in the Edo period where people didn't have the paved roads. And then the major difference is that modern walking, people use a large stride. Whereas in Nanba walking, because you kind of move from your center and you bring the back foot forward rather than taking a big stride, a big step out, it's more compact. So I even came up with a proverb: long stride, no pride. Short stride is dignified. So, and also the idea of walking, I'm going to take a walk. You see it in like models who are modeling clothing, or people, it's kind of there's a tendency to want to show off. Look at me. I'm, an appeal to your presence, you walking into the room. Yeah. Whereas Nanba walking, you take out that sense of forcing your presence. So you almost, that's why they call it a ninja walk sometimes, because you almost become not invisible, but you don't make waves when you enter a space.
Because I have this image, you almost glide past. Yeah. And also it sounds like there's economy of movement.
Yeah, it's very economical because you're focusing on relaxing your muscles rather than using them. And you of course you need muscles to walk, to even stand, but to have it happen the minimum amount required and the best connection, and that results in reduced exaggerated movements. Actually, Nicholas, the place where it came from originally was the kimono. Japanese wearing kimono, because if you twist your body when you wear a kimono, it comes undone. And also the footwear, which has either the geta or the wooden clogs, or the waraji, the straw sandals, which have a sort of a thong for your big toe and the other toes. And if you kick off the ground and move in that forceful way, that thing breaks very easily, that little thong that connects to the shoe. So they learn to walk with a kind of it's not really a shuffle, but it's a low to the ground, no heel strike, just gliding along. And that's easy to do if you move from your center. It feels very awkward if you just try to focus on, okay, I'm going to shuffle my feet along. It just looks really strange. But it's just the natural result of letting your hips lead, your pelvis lead.
I see. So is Nanba walking, is that something most Japanese would know of, but like an old art?
It's a bit like, does the fish know about water? It's so, it's just always been there. And so it doesn't really seem, I don't even think they had a name for it originally. Like even ninja that word came out in the 1920s, I think. It's sort of something that was a natural way that they moved. But when you ask Japanese about Nanba, they will usually respond with this stereotyped image of putting the same foot and arm together instead of contrasting and twisting. So the right foot is forward and the left arm is forward, and then you alternate. Instead of that, you kind of move together. But the way they visualize that is almost like a robot. In fact, there was this one professor who wanted to research Nanba, and instead of researching it properly by talking to people who did it, he just kind of experimented by himself using that incorrect image, where he would literally move his right, he would like turn his body side to side, his right side forward, then his left side forward, and his right side forward, and his left side forward, in this sort of robotic march. And he, as a professor, he had to reach a conclusion. So he concluded in his thesis that people in the Edo period were not able to turn corners.
This guy's a researcher, is he?
Well,
Yeah. It reminds me of a sumo movie. It's almost like an exaggerated sumo walk or something.
yeah, actually, that's a good observation. You find Namba style movements in all of the traditional and martial arts and crafts. You think of the swordsman holding. You would have the right hand and the right foot forward in the hanmi position. And the sumo becomes more stylized in no drama when they turn in a circle. They have the fan out and they turn in a circle with very low sliding feet on the stage, and it's just totally soundless. Those are highly stylized, but very Namba-esque forms of movement.
I see. Right. So how did you stumble into Nanba?
Okay, well, I guess sort of the way that that the Japanese would, and that is just because it becomes a part of the way you see people move and the way you move in crowds and keep your body compact, and also training in Aikido. All the movements are very Namba-esque, although they were not usually described that way. And then one day, my Aikido sensei demonstrated what he called Nanba walking, or another word for it he gave was samurai walk. He said, this is how the samurai walked. And he demonstrated it. And it just fascinated me because I thought, I've got to find out more about this, And I researched it and discovered that at the Toho Gakuen, which is Japan's largest conservatory of music, there was a professor there who was teaching Nanba to music students. And he had just started a series of monthly classes, which I joined. And then several years, that was about 15 years ago. And some years after that, he asked me to teach then at Toho Gakuen. I said, well, what do you want me to teach? He said, well, something with Nanba, but you already have Nanba classes. So he said, well, what? Because I was also practicing tap dancing. So I taught Nanba tap for 4 years at Toho Gakuen. And then, I started to realize, well, it's not just tap or Aikido, but it works in calligraphy. And it's really, if you want to study one of those arts, you have to have a teacher, usually a dojo, lots of conditions. It's just not that easy. Plus you have to take years or decades to pursue it. And I found in Nanba the condensed essence of these movements. Now, maybe it's easier for me to see that having done the other one as well, the traditional arts as well. However, it can be condensed into something that can be practiced anywhere.
Yeah, look, you're very passionate about this, and it does seem like it's a lost art or philosophy, but there are examples of Japanese professional athletes achieving world-class results with Nanba movement, which you've told me about. Yeah. Would you like to share some examples?
Sure, I would love to. Let me start a little bit earlier, though, in history. We'll go back to, say, the Edo period when Nanba would have been sort of the normal way that people walked. And then they had this encounters with the West. And one of the early encounters was a Dr. Erwin Beltz, a German doctor who in 1876 came to Japan, wrote a diary, eventually became the physician for the Meiji Emperor. So he was a pretty significant position. But he was noticing that Japanese use these jinriksha, the person-powered carriage. And you find these all over Asia. However, and I have a number of Asian students, and they are aware of them, but it's considered to be a really low-status profession because like an alternative to a pack animal. You're carting somebody. But in Japan, they take great pride, and they still do it for tourists and stuff. But the point is, the Belts would hire a jinriksha. It was like a man-driven taxi. Sometimes they would go long distances. Like he went from Tokyo to Nikko. Now, ordinarily, you'd have to change horses 6 times to do it, and it would take 3 days. But the jinriksha got him there in 27 hours, eating barely anything but some rice balls and vegetables and water. That was it. And he said, this is just amazing. He started to notice the way that they moved, or the flying fleeted foot messengers who would run from Edo at the time, which was Tokyo, the previous name for Tokyo, to Osaka or Kyoto, 500 kilometers in 3 days. Jeez. And so that's like two full marathons a day. And they were paid really well, thankfully. It was a profession that was highly prized if you could do it. And they had this technique of Nanba, which enabled them to do that. Now, ordinary person might take 2 weeks to do that distance, right? But then they in the Meiji period, they imported lots of Western technology, including military technology, selling them guns and battleships and all the rest of it. And along with that came marching. So marching is the origin of modern walking in Japan, because you're swinging your arms and it's sort of mechanized and it's designed to help people follow orders. And there's a hilarious movie by Yamada Yoji, which he features samurai being taught to run that way, and they just think it's so hilarious. They can't stop laughing when they see the new English style of walking.
Yeah, you've shown me that footage of that scene.
And then later, though, although it was sort of enforced on Japanese, and that's what they taught them in school, like the Undo Kai, they still play this marching music and they march in and stuff. And then Western clothes, of course, are more forgiving of twisting and forcing, and you can get thick shoes to cushion the blow that you otherwise would be delivering to your feet. So they kind of started to lose it. But even as late or as 1932 in the Los Angeles Olympics, the Japanese practiced a form of swimming, which is sort of, let's call it Nanba swimming, although Nihon Eihos, Japanese style swimming, came from the samurai who learned how to swim with full armor on. You have 50 kilos on their back. And so and it's also really similar to sort of the way that squids move and things like that. And so the Americans were, just making fun of them. Oh, you guys look like octopuses, and get out of the pool. The Japanese are in the pool. It's all dirty and everything. But they walked away with 5 gold medals, 5 silver medals, and 2 bronze medals. So there. And then more recently, what you had been mentioning was in Sydney, in your country, in the Sydney Olympics in 2000, Takahashi Naoko won a gold medal. She was a great marathon runner, and it was all in the news at the time that she was using Nanba Bashiri.
I remember her. Yeah. She was very small, and surprisingly, she had terrible flexibility. Yeah, but she would kind of shuffle along at this constant pace and never get tired.
And not pumping the arms much, just a real small, compact movements. And then also there's a Japanese sprinter named Tsuesugu Shingo, who has set many records in Asian competitions, and he won a bronze medal at the Beijing Olympics in 2008. So, in sports, there's lots of examples.
And what about music? Because you've mentioned music. How would Nanba help?
Okay.
Like, are there specific types of musicians? Does it help people who play the violin or the guitar?
Well, the Nanba, as I learned it from Yano Tatsuhiko Sensei, who taught for he's just recently retired from 30 years or more of teaching there. But all of his students were music students. And he was trained as a physical education teacher. The first thing they told him is you can't teach any ball sports because if they injure their fingers, it could ruin their career. So that eliminated like 90% of what he had studied. But he focused on track and field and swimming. And then the students were under such pressure because they have to practice sometimes 10 to 12 hours a day. And it's so competitive. And they have these, they become professionals, most of them, and many go to Europe, join orchestras and but it's so competitive that they were literally their body was being like damaged by over practice. Repetitive stress injury, I think, is the word for it. So they had carpal tunnel syndrome and stiff shoulders, and they could play the violin, but they couldn't get out of that physical shape that they put their body in for the violin. And so they were tuning their instrument, but they weren't tuning their body. So he experimented with yoga and Feldenkrais and Alexander technique, and the common comment by the students was they felt relaxed when they were doing that, but as soon as they started playing again, it went right back, and they didn't have time to practice that anyway. They needed something they could practice that could also be done when they were practicing the instrument. And so he discovered Nanba, which was from the ancient martial arts and samurai arts, and he then adapted it. So he created a curriculum involving Nanba balance exercises, which help tune your body, literally take out those twists that you tend to put in. and free your muscles, free your joints to move more, integrate better. And that definitely affects the sound, because if you have a jerky shoulder movement, that's going to definitely be magnified in the instrument. And then also Nanba flow exercises, which enabled them to actually get some physical exercise and fluid movement and generate some energy. And then Nanba walking, which helped clear their mind of clutter.
I see. Now that you've touched on exercise, exercise seems like a challenge now for most people. It's overwhelming, and often people separate it from regular life, and they think you have to go to a gym or you have to get a personal trainer, and this mentality of no pain, no gain.
Yeah.
And especially now with things like CrossFit being so popular, people feel they have to almost become like an amateur athlete just to exercise.
Yeah.
But Nanba is very different to this idea of exercise. And you mentioned that it's movement without pain. It's like a movement without pain philosophy.
Yeah. Though we definitely, it's the opposite of no pain, no gain. If there's pain, you're doing something wrong. You're either doing the movement wrong or you're not listening to your body to figure out how to do it correctly. Now, I should add, though, that that people who train at a high level, like you said, top athletes, they need to do that because they are at the edge of where even a fraction of a second can make a difference between a medal or no medal. So, and they will push themselves to the verge of in any time being able to break down. Right? They really push themselves, and they can't do that their whole life. Obviously, many professional athletes, they reach their 30s and they become a coach, and that is one path. But I think what you're talking about more is the average person who's trying to be and look like the super athlete, and it's very focused on physical appearance and numbers. How many reps did you do? And always increasing the quantity. It's very quantity focused, and it's very competitive, and it's always these are the standards, and you use equipment. So it's not really listening to your body at all. It's following a standard that someone has established, for good or bad. But there are a lot of people now in academia that are really questioning those things. For example, in running, the barefoot professor at Daniel Barenheim, I think his name, at Harvard, he's called the barefoot professor, and he studied the way that Kenyan people ran barefoot. And he found that they did not do a heel strike. It was more of a front foot strike or a flat foot strike. And he started studying the structure of the foot and found that this was actually better. And so there are people who are questioning the trend to do everything in that quantitative, competitive approach. And Nanba is focused much more on comparing not to other people, but to yourself, first of all. So how are you doing compared to the way you were doing? We do a lot of before and after comparisons. So you check yourself in one particular movement, and you do an intervention with the Nanba exercise, and you check yourself again. It feels better.
So, Will, as a teacher of Nanba training, what's involved? What do you teach your students?
Well, there are 3 parts to the curriculum. One is what we call the balance exercises. There are 12 ways that you can move your body to untwist it, to basically readjust alignment. 12 exercises. It takes about 3 minutes to do. And then there's the Nanba flow exercises. There's 7 of them, and they are based on movements from daily life, but they are more vigorous and rhythmic. So you build rhythm and energy from that. And then there's Nanba walking, which we've already spoken about, and that is obviously practiced best out of doors. And then I guess the extension of that, or the way that you kind of pursue it, is through keeping a notebook. So you note your insights. And some people like to take photos, and because you start to notice more things, your senses get clear, get more relaxed, you get more curious.
And this is something you could practice every day because you're not exerting yourself. You're not requiring rest.
No. Well, it's interesting because one of the benefits that my students tell me is that they're sleeping better at night, even though they don't feel like they're really exercising that hard. And I think the reason for that is because they're releasing the stress. They don't take today's stress with them through till tomorrow. They release it the same day.
Nice way to put it. Yeah. So now that you've mentioned one benefit, which is they tend to sleep better, what are the other benefits of number training?
Well, I would say there are three. One is the ability to do self-tuning, which, just we tend to get twisted and out of balance in life. So you can retune yourself. And that's also, like, if you play an instrument, it's even more important because you really get twisted out. And then, so self-tuning is one. Another thing is accelerated mastery. If you're trying to learn a skill that has some performance on a stage or something, and you have a time deadline and you need to really move your body with the instrument or whatever it is that you're doing efficiently, effectively, beautifully, and strongly, Nanba movements will teach you that. So it accelerates your mastery of a skill for performance. And then the third thing, which we all need, is enhanced energy. You don't feel, if you feel fatigue, it's going to slow you down, make it difficult to achieve your ikigai as well, because you don't have the energy to do it, right? So Nanba will give you more energy.
I have a question. What I think I've learned and what I've observed is when one does number training, they must be present.
Yeah.
Because these movements are so controlled and slight, and it's like you're developing new habits.
Yeah.
So is presence important?
Oh, absolutely. And that's probably an important overlap with ikigai, because I would use the word engagement of head, heart, and hara. Hara is the lower abdomen. So head, heart, and body, if you will. Just full engagement in what you're doing and trying to understand that it's not just about, say, mindfulness in a mental sense, but that there are physical principles at work as well. So physically, emotionally, and spiritually present. Yeah.
No, I'm very interested. It's one of those things I'd really love to do in person. And I know you offer it online, but now that you've mentioned the word ikigai, number seems to be something that you are very passionate about. Is it your ikigai?
Absolutely, very much my ikigai. I keep coming back to it because it seems inexhaustible. There's always a solution or a new insight that comes from it, even though it may look on the outside to be repeating the same thing.
And how long have you been practicing number?
Well, unconsciously for 48 years, because that's what I started with Aikido, So, but I didn't know that it was Nanba. And then later, I guess 15 years ago, I sort of discovered the word and the method of Nanba. So about 15 years in that sense.
As you know, I had no idea. And this is what I love about Japan, that you connect with someone who's either living in Japan or lived in Japan, and you discover something you didn't know existed. And for someone who's lived in Japan for so long, I think that we could learn a lot from you. So I'll definitely be having you back on the podcast.
Right.
But if some of our listeners are interested in number, where can people find out more information about number and about what you do?
Well, the simplest way is I have a website. It's www.nanbawalking.com. That's spelled Nanba, but it'll get you there with M as well. But it's Nanba Walking.com.
So Nanba Walking.
Yeah.
And I know you offer courses and you have a
Facebook Live group. Yeah, we do Facebook Live sessions every month. And so, but all of this information you can get through the website. Yeah, there's just lots of ways to engage in it, and it's all in English, so
that helps. Yeah. No, I mean I see you as my senpai, so I think people would learn a lot from you.
Well, I've done 2 TED talks, on TEDx talks on Nanba, which are both listed on the website. So one is in Japanese with English subtitles, which is kind of a kick to watch. So you can follow it anyway. It's in English. But then the other one I did in Norway in English.
That's right. So I recommend people start with that if they want to have some visual context of what we've been talking about today.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And I look forward to our next conversation. And because you've lived there for so long and you practice so many different Japanese arts like Aikido and Shodo, would you come back onto the
Oh,
podcast?
absolutely. And Nick, if I could leave or your listeners, our listeners, with a simple etymology of a word for the word for body in Japanese. The original character is made of two parts. One is bones, and the other is luxuriant. So that was the idea of body. The body was a luxuriant bones, and I think that's just a wonderful way of thinking about it. We focus on the bones in Nanba. It's a very Nanba-esque sense.
Yeah, it's funny how we tend to focus on muscle or our ligaments. I recently saw a podiatrist and he was so good, and he was looking at my feet saying, you don't want orthotics, you don't want high-heeled shoes, you want to almost be flat-footed. And it's really good when you find someone passionate about what they do. And this guy was so passionate about his job as a podiatrist, and I think part of Ikigai is being passionate about something, whether it's a hobby or your work, and also passionate about learning. And so going back to about what you said, Japan offers this insight into words because you can look at the kanji, and within the kanji you see, as you said, the etymology, the meaning of the word, and it's an endless playground, I think, Japanese kanji.
Exactly.
Anyway, we'll leave it there, and I'll be speaking to you again. Thanks so much for your time, Will.
Thank you, Nick. And it's really a pleasure to be part of the Ikigai Tribe community. I think you're doing a wonderful thing to show the real meaning behind the image that people have, and to connect with so many experts in Ikigai. So that's just wonderful. I really applaud your efforts.
Thank you. That's high praise coming from you. So thank you so much.
You got me started all over, because I used to believe that the way that you said that people see, I said, yeah. Oh, okay. So you completely turned my thoughts around on that.
Well, that's what I'm hoping to do. So that's high praise, and thank you for saying that. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Ikigai podcast. To download Ikigai worksheets, to take the Ikigai questionnaire, or to join the Ikigai tribe, please visit ikigaitribe.com.